The more questions, the better. When I go out live, I just do an hour-long Q&A because then I don't have to think of anything. See, I just have to. It's reactive.
Is that how I let people in now?
Yeah, let people in. Wow, that's quite a lot of people. Hello, large numbers of people.
Have you seen me dice bag? The Grognard Files.
Hello, my name is Dirk the Dice, and this is the Grognard Files podcast, where we talk bobbins about tabletop RPGs from back in the day and today. I'm coming live from my temporary den here in Stockholm, in Sweden. If I look out to my right, I can see the so-called German church, and to my left, I can see science fiction book Handel in the Old Town region of the city. It's packed with great science fiction books and games. I'm here on holiday with the family, and I have enjoyed a few days exploring its delights. Water is never too far away in Stockholm. The place is ripe for a Scandi noir with magic. I managed to pack the ridiculous homemade shrine to the actor Caroline Munro. I'll just give it a tap. Ah yes, Smoke Over London. 1966, the Eternal Champion's first appearance as a supporting artist. London. Yes, in this episode we are joined by special guest Ben Aaronovitch, a writer who is best known for his Rivers of London books and graphic novels. Rivers of London is a captivating urban fantasy series that follows Peter Grant, a police officer who discovers a hidden magic world within London. Now you can play in this world thanks to Chaosium, who have created a role-playing game set in it. As part of this special assessment unit, you can join the Folly, a secret investigative team seeking out threats from the supernatural and other magical incursions. At GROGMEETish this year, Ben joined us in the Zoom of Role-Playing Rambling, and he's a gamer, so it was great to spend some time talking about his formative years as a gamer and his insight into some of his favourite games and his inspirations. At the end, I'll give a quick review of the game, share my thoughts and feelings about Rivers of London RPG. Until then, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
Open box.
Welcome to the Zoom of Role-Playing Rambling. I'm joined by none other than writer Ben Aaronovitch. Hello there, Ben.
Hello. I'm always up for a ramble, especially not one involving hills, countryside.
Don't worry, you don't have to leave your armchair for this ramble.
Fine. I did do quite a lot of rambling when I was younger. I just want to say that I did, and when I got to 20, I stopped, and I've never gone back.
And where are you beaming from? Are you from your hometown of London?
No, I'm from London. But my parents used to get rid of me by sending me on camping trips to Brecon Beacons and Derbyshire and places like that, where I would yoink across the hills wearing a pack and sleeping in bloody 1970s tents. You younger guys don't know how good you've got it camping these days, right? Until you try to put up a ridgepole tent in a storm, I tell you. And so I feel I've done the countryside. I no longer feel the need to sort of like inflict myself on the countryside. I feel I'm a low impact, ecologically low impact guy.
I imagine you as a kind of flaneur going through London, trying to find the intimate places for inspiration. Is that?
No, not flaneur. Flaneur is far too pretentious a term. What I do is when I'm writing a particular area, the first thing I do is I go, if it's the summer, obviously, is I go find myself a cafe. And then I sit in the cafe and I drink coffee and I watch people go past. That's the first thing I do, just to get a feel for what the area is like. And so I usually I will pick this area and then I will go and sit in the cafe there. And then sometimes there aren't cafes, which is a bit of a pain. And then I get dragged places against my will. And then they end up in the books because I've been there now. I might as well write about them. So,
Are there still new places to discover in London?
Oh, yeah. I haven't done Southall yet. Southall's only just come up on the Elizabeth line. So now I can go to Southall. Also, I've got to that age where I get the not almost Almost Dead card, which is like the card that allows you to travel for free after 9:30 anywhere within the M25 area. And so I'm like, yeah, Southall, baby, here I come. So I've never researched it. So, but everywhere you go, even outside London, you start researching the places, and the stories just pop out. They just go, "Hello, I have a story. Please write me." So that's how I work, basically.
Well, this weekend, all of us here have been playing games all across the world, and I know that you're a gamer. So tell us about your first experiences of role-playing.
You're looking at someone who actually owned the original beige box.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's how old I am. The original beige box with the original 3 books, which I didn't keep.
Oh no!
I even had Greyhawk and Blackhawk and Eldritch Gods and all that stuff, and chainmail. I was back when rules were written incomprehensibly for people who didn't actually know what they were doing. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, I remember that the impact RuneQuest had was not so much that it was like a classless system with percentages. It was clearly written. That was the thing, right? I mean, it was a bit overly complicated. And then I remember I had the first edition of Chivalry and Sorcery, which is my favorite rule book ever.
Oh, wow.
Because it was just dense. You could just spend hours and hours and hours poring over 8 different systems to do things. So none of this universal system where you have a universal dice roll for everything. No, that's not how Chivalry and Sorcery works. Chivalry and Sorcery, you had loads of systems that just fitted everything. Like I was on an entire subsystem for alchemy, which I knew could just play that as a sub game. I love that kind of stuff. I've always been a bit of a simulationist, so the more crunchy and simulationist, the better. So I got on quite well with GURPS, for example. Not to play, because I reckon it would be a freaking nightmare to actually play GURPS, but just to read the rules and the source books and stuff.
So who were you playing with at the time?
Back then, the usual group of misfit losers at school. I was 12, it was like the non-popular kids. That was us.
You're in good company today.
I was, people who thought train spotting was a bit too exciting and couldn't be bothered to go out.
So for you, did you enjoy the academic exercise of actually reading the rules then, rather than actually?
I enjoyed the creative potentiality of the rules.
Right.
I mean, to put it a bit easier, you take Traveller and suddenly you've got rules for making spaceships. You actually spend a tremendous amount of time making spaceships and planets. As soon as you get rules for making spaceships and planets and stuff, you start making spaceships and planets. Right? The actual game is almost irrelevant at that point, because you're thinking, oh yeah, I've made this planet. And that's what attracted me. I mean, you can see as a direct line from that to me writing. There's no... The two things are linked. It's not like I went from that and then I thought, I'll write novels. These two things are just kind of like linked completely together.
Did you make that transition from playing games to writing? What were your first writing accomplishments?
Oh, I wrote short stories that no one is ever going to see. Ever in the history of ever. And then I made a concerted effort to become a scriptwriter because that looked easier than writing a novel. Really, my career started with the PCW. See, the PCW, I can't spell. I'm crap at spelling. And I used to have my mum's old portable typewriter, and so I've got a very heavy action even now because I basically trained on that. PCW came across, and you had LocoScript, and that was it. Spell checker. I was away. You could go back and change things. So I wrote scripts, got the Doctor Who gig, and then W.H. Allen routinely offered the writer of whatever the particular story was the chance to write the novelization. So basically someone paid me to write my first 40,000. It's a novella length, really. It's 40,000 words, but that was more, because up until that point, like most people, I'd never written more than about 8,000, 10,000 words, tops. And so someone paid me to do it, which is the best way of learning how to write, is to have someone pay you to do it. That's my motto anyway. Yeah, I also had the Doctor Who, Facet Doctor Who role-playing game, which I sold when I was broke. I wish I hadn't sold it. I had the Doctor Who one. I had the the first Star Trek one. They were really good. I had all the games. I had Bunnies and Burrows. I had the original Bunnies and Burrows. Oh, that's, I loved all that stuff. I like looking at worlds. So for me, an attractive thing as well. So you can imagine like RuneQuest, Gloriantha, Tecumel, things like that. That's what sort of attracted me. That kind of attracted me. The rule systems, I've always been a sucker for BRP because I understand what under 20% means, right? I do not really. I can't actually see what the odds are of rolling over 14 on 3 die 6, right?
Yeah.
But I can actually understand what 20% is, even though. And don't tell me percentage dice don't actually reflect percentage probabilities, because I don't want to know. All right, I just don't want to know.
Absolutely.
I'm happy the way I am. I don't want to know about percentage dice probabilities. Thank you very much. I'm just going to pretend that they accurately reflect the probability, because that helps me. And so of course, with BRP, you get like a lot of settings. So you got Stormbringer, you got the Hawkmoon setting. They did a very briefly, which I had to buy later off eBay, the Hawkmoon setting and things like that. And I love all those settings. I love settings. I love things like Pendragon, where you take the system and you make it reflect a milieu rather than have like a universal system in the way that GURPS is. You actually have a system and you make it reflect the milieu. So everything in Pendragon is designed around making you be an Arthurian knight, as opposed to an Arthurian knight being an option. You are an Arthurian knight. It just says that at the beginning of the thing. And I'm really looking forward to the reboot, by the way, because that's one of my favorite settings.
I'd say about Doctor Who. I'm not a huge Doctor Who fan. So what were the scripts that you produced?
No, I wrote Remembrance of the Daleks and Battlefield, less successful. And then they cancelled the show because they hated me, because I was just getting into the stride, and then they cancelled the show. So there you go. I've never forgiven them for that.
Yeah, well, my co-host really likes the Sylvester McCoy year. So was it during that period?
I was the final hurrah of the old Doctor Who.
Do you do mild?
You mentioned BRP, and obviously your Rivers of London series has been transformed into a game by KRC, and we'll talk about that. But for people who are not aware of Rivers of London, and there might be people listening, just tell us about that and how that came about.
Well, I apologise for everyone under the age of 40 and not from the UK, but my original mental pitch for it was, what if Gandalf joined the Sweeney? that was the original pitch. So and then then you have to go, when you actually sell it, you have to go, oh, it's a bit like Harry Potter except the police. I hate it as a comparison, but hey, I needed the money. I was going broke, so I needed the money, so I was just going to say anything to get it sold. And it is basically, I wanted to do a police procedural where the police did magic. It was called Magic Cops for a long time. Like, mentally, it was called Magic Cops before I came up with the title. And it's just one of those things, you start coming up with a basic idea and then it accumulates. It is rather like writing a campaign for a role-playing game, in that you start with your basic idea and then you have to think, well, how does that work? How does this work? What happens next? How do we develop that story? So in some ways, the techniques are very similar. The world-building techniques are definitely exactly the same. The only difference between world building for novels and world building for games is that you do not have to be so detailed for novels. In fact, it's better if you're not too detailed for novels. And that's one of the interesting things I found helping translate it into a role-playing game, is that you've got to go, what is the area effect of this spell? How many meters does this get cast? How far does it go? How powerful is the glamour? How often do you have to be exposed to the glamour before you start building up? You have to start coming up with actual concrete figures for that. And that's where the kind of difference between world building for a game and world building for a book. For a book, the story is king. And in a game, you have to create the tools for the players to create their own story. You can't kind of impose the story on them, which is nearly where a lot of scenarios go wrong, is that you cannot impose stories on your players. They will always go down the wrong corridor. If you give them 3 corridors, you detail 2, they'll go down the 3rd corridor every single bloody time without fail. And so therefore you have to have a set of tools that allow you to nimbly jump, go, oh yes, of course, you go to this country that I've never even thought about yet. And they are, that's what random roll. People despise random encounter tables. I'm sorry. Random encounter tables are a GM's friend when your players decide to piss off to some part of the map you haven't detailed yet. It's never mind all that lovely lore that you did. They're just going off and you go, right, you run into some orcs and you're all dead. Ha!
Bit of Rivers of London that I enjoy is the characters as well. So Peter Grant is the kind of central character that draws you into the world. So where did he come from?
He just arrived. I mean, I had a character. I knew he was a guy because it was kind of like first person. So I knew it had to be a guy because I wasn't confident enough to write a woman in first person at that point. Because it's quite a difficult thing. It's a very intimate viewpoint. First person viewpoint. You're in someone's actual life. You're in their head. So you have to, it's not something you just embark on. I shall do it now. Although some people do, they do it very well. I hate them. Terrible people. But, so I'm kind of like, it's a bit like you putting out a specification for an aeroplane, okay? Well, the military puts out a specification. If you look at the interwar development of Spitfire or something, the military puts out a specification, right? And they say it's got to go so fast, it's going to go high ceiling, this range, that many guns. And you start thinking, well, what's this person like? No. Because they got you want them to vaguely fit the plot. They can't kind of wander off. And your subconscious tends to produce something. Usually you just rely on your subconscious to come up with something. And one day he walked into my life and I wrote what's essentially the first 4 pages of the book. I looked at it and I thought, fuck me, this will sell. And that was it. He just like walked into my life and I thought, God, he's really attractive. Where did he come from? Who cares where he came from? Bring it on with it. And then it was just a question of, finding things for him to do, basically.
And has he surprised you as he's moved along through the books? Because his character's developed quite a bit, hasn't it?
I mean, all my characters surprises me. That's the great thing about a character that's sort of taken. It's a conceit that we have as authors that characters take on a life of their own, right? Because of course, obviously, it's all our brain. It's not actually coming from an external source. But if you feel like they've taken a life on their own, it means their characters have developed to the point where they're interesting. See, if your character is just your mouthpiece or your character is just a schematic set of things to get the plot running, that's a flat character. And, your background characters can be like that because your background characters don't have to be hugely three-dimensional. But once you've lost control of your characters, it's a sign that your characters are actually going to pop off the page. They're going to pop off the page. And I'm very lazy. I just rely on that happening.
And central to it as well, and I suppose what's attractive to us as gamers is that there's a sense of logic to the magic, and how much of that is informed from your role-playing experience.
Oh well, yeah. Let's talk about Ars Magica for a bit, shall we? What it was Ars Magica, right? And they say the words and they get the whiz or whatever it's called. I can never remember the we, which always made me laugh. I think was And that's, I like that system. I like that system, but it was incredibly clunky. I mean, the combat system in Ars Magica was just a disaster, but it was a lot of fun to look at, and you could create your own spells, and that was very interesting to me. And it had a sort of set of rules. You had hermetic magic, and the idea was that someone had looked at the systems of magic and created a synthesis. And I thought, but what is it you're doing when you're saying the words? Right? Because you can't have magic really have words that you just go fish and suddenly a fish falls out of the sky. You can't really have that. There has to be something that's going on. And so I thought what it is that the words are just the notation that you use in your mind to link with whatever it is you're doing in your mind that's manipulating whatever it is magic is manipulating to change reality. And that was the thing. So I thought, right, that's how that works. Okay. And I've figured out where the magic was coming from, which nobody in our world knows. So that's why I can't tell you. See, I know how it works. I can't tell anyone else because no one's figured it out. I mean, possibly in 30 years' time, Abigail will figure out how magic's actually working. But it will involve maths that nobody except about 5 people will understand. It will just be like, yeah, I managed to get third tertiary manifold of a subspace domain into one of my stories once because Peter's just so fed up with trying to work out where magic comes from. And once you do that, and then I wanted another kind of magic. I wanted the more whimsical Jack Vance Fey magic that you get in like Lioness, where it's just follows a kind of weird logic of its own that has nothing to do with our kind of ideas of logic. So I let that be the magic that kind of like, although I know what the underlying systems are, they're literally like the rivers are literally changing reality around them. When they sit, if the genius loci sits in a place for too long, they literally start changing the reality of the world around them to suit them, whether they want to or not. And in order to sort of like not sort of really mess with people, they have to kind of keep bleeding it off, which is what the courts are for and everything like that. And that's one of the things we've been doing recently. We've been trying to work out, how do you put that in game terms? How do you depict that in game terms so a GM can come along and go, oh, I will do that, because you get the scenario designers and they go, well, can this happen and can this happen? And I've never had to think about it. Like, I don't know. And I've had to sit down and write big chunks of kind of thing just for the role-playing game. Some of which you won't be in the role-playing game because it's like, I'm going, you can't tell people that, or just take all the mystery out of the stories. You're just gonna have to trust me. Right, I'll tell you what can happen in the stories and not. And yeah, so the role, so it came out of Ars Magica. The Latin is a parallel convergence because I was reading Terry Pratchett, A Science of Discworld book, and I think it's Cohen says. Has a little footnote saying that if anyone was going to find out how to synthesize magic, it was going to be Isaac Newton. And a little light went off in my head and went, bing! So if you have Isaac Newton, or what the modern scholars call the Newtonian synthesis of magic, right, as opposed to discovering magic, which is the old imperial way of looking at it, you see, because we're in a modern age now, then it's going to be in Latin, because that's what Isaac Newton would have written his magic book in. He would have written it in Latin. He would have used Latin tags for everything. And then you have this fun thing where you have like classical Latin from the 18th century, and then you have the sort of dog Latin that people in Casterbrook were using in the 1920s because they weren't really paying attention during the Latin lessons, so they were just kind of making it up as they went along. And that allows you kind of a certain amount of flexibility. And then, you think, well, other traditions don't use Latin. Some of them use Greek. There's a whole Middle Eastern tradition that probably uses Persian, and so there's that kind of that allows you a certain leeway, but it also means I have to find people who speak these languages, which is like my quest for experts. I have a quest for experts. I go, I need someone who knows about buses in 1925, things like that. I find myself kind of doing that sort of thing.
It's great to hear that you mentioned Jack Vance, Lioness, because I'm a huge fan of that. And when I was reading the books, I did feel that the Vancian elements was the kind of the signature and the vestigia.
Every so often, someone will have an argument where it's like elaborate use of language is used to try and trip somebody else up that took their way out of things. That all came from Vance. Yeah, I'm a big Vance fan. I like, Planet of Adventure is one of my favorite books. I just like his weird world creation, that kind of weird world creation that he does, where it's so detailed, and you read Lioness, and it's just the whole history of the island and everything it's just become so complex and interesting and interwoven, and yet at the same time very magical. It's very magical. It's like a world where the fantastic just happens around the corner. You just go out off your path, the beaten path, and you find the fantastic, which is actually a very Russian idea, that you go, the deeper you go into the forest, the more weirder everything gets, until once you're not in the forest that's when Baba Yaga turns up and all that kind of stuff, which is always a laugh.
Back in 2019, Paul Fricker was a guest of ours at GROGMEET, and somebody in the audience said, Call of Cthulhu is inspired by Lovecraft. Are you going to do any books or any games that are based on other authors? And he couldn't say anything because it was about to be announced at DragonMeet that the game was coming. So just tell us how that came about, your collaboration with...
But it's all Newcastle's fault. It's all Newcastle. I wanted a role-playing game. I didn't want a role-playing game because, like, I had to explain this to my agent. They said, "There's no money in it, right? We're not going to make any money out of this, Okay, so I want you can't gouge them because nobody in role-playing games, apart from Hasbro, has any money whatsoever, right? So there's no point trying to gouge them for, all that happens if you make them pay over the odds for your license is that you just end up with a game that's got no money spent on it because they spent all the money on the license, So I had to convince him of that. So I had him primed, ready, and I wanted BRP because I just happen to like BRP. Okay, I'm an old fashioned, none of this storytelling. I like a bit of crunch. I like a bit of crunch. And I like a lot of fluff. Right, so I love Call of Cthulhu, not so much for the existential dread, but for the fact that when you get a Call of Cthulhu scenario, it's got about 5 pages on the history of Maine. That's just, and it's woven into the fabric of the scenario, and that really appeals to me. That's the sort of thing that really appeals to me. And so I would have liked BRP. I mean, I would have settled for somebody else, or somebody else could have come up to me and come up with a completely new system. But I was kind of favouring the BRP. No one had ever approached us about it. So I was going on a tour and I did a lunchtime stop off in Newcastle, and Newcastle Waterstone's very convenient because it's just, I don't know if anyone knows Newcastle. Well, it's just up the road from the station. So you literally dump your stuff in the left luggage office, run up the road, sign a load of books, get back down to the station, go back up to Edinburgh or down to York or something for an evening's event. And Lynn Hardy ambushed me, and apparently she'd been like rehearsing how she was going to convince me, and it was like, would you like to? Yes, I would love to. Yes, let's do it. And it's like, okay, that was it, because I wanted to do it, they wanted to do it, I wanted to do it with them, they wanted to do it with me. I mean, it's one of those things where there was like both of us were pushing incredibly open doors. It's like, we practically fell into the hallway. So that was a lot of fun, and and it worked out really, really well. I also like Chaos In because they're pretty much the last of the companies that I grew up with. Like GDW's gone. All the companies I grew up with are sort of gone. I mean, admittedly, they've gone through some changes, and and you can't really call TSR anymore. So they are literally sort of pretty much the last of the companies that still exists. And so I like that kind of sense of history because I'm an old fart, and that's how it happened. And they just said, I said, let's do it. So a long period of negotiation with my agent went on because he's very protective of the IP. And you have to be very careful with the IP because if it gets into the hand of a major American multinational, they will fuck you over. And they won't even do it out of any kind of spite or anything. They'll just do it because they're a major American multinational, and fucking over people is what they do, and they're just built to do it, and that's what they will do. So you have to be really careful. So you end up with, like, my book contracts are quite short compared to my role-playing game contracts, and my role-playing game contracts are nothing compared to the contracts that we have with television companies, because with television you literally have to specify that they're not allowed to have your firstborn as a sacrifice in the event of the TV series failing, because they will try it on, and they will just constantly try it on. So, but fortunately, I have a lawyer. See, that's what lawyers are for. And so off they went. So then she brought in Paul Frecker, who's got a lot of experience with Call of Cthulhu. Is a good system guy. And then we just sat down and started getting on with it. And they, asked me a lot of questions. We did a lot of Zoom calls. I've got a big document called Things I Thought of. I can't remember. One of us suggested that we use luck, that's it. I was reading the big gold basic role-playing game book, and it has the things on luck. And I thought, well, that will work. That allows us to do the Fae and the Genius Loci if we give them a luck-based mechanic, because Lynn likes luck as a mechanic, and it's kind of suits Rivers of London, because unlike Call of Cthulhu, you're not supposed to die in Rivers of London. It's not, the aim is not to die, defeat the bad guys before going insane, right? The aim is to actually come out triumphant on the top. It's much more, as I say, it's Call of Cthulhu with added hope. So, it's like, so luck works for that, because, someone shoots you in the face, right? And you've got some luck. You can go, my face, which is exactly what the sort of thing which happened in the book, you see. So that works very well, right? Someone tries to shoot you in the face. If you're the main character, you're not going to die, okay? Unless it's a very strange book. That kind of worked, and we all sat it down, and we were going to do both the American and the British sides of the book in the first book, but it just got so completely out of hand that we ended up splitting them off because we wouldn't have had enough room on the British stuff for the British people for the Americans to play London, and we wouldn't have had enough American stuff to keep them happy anyway. So, and we figured, well, we might as well do it as 2 books. So there will be an American. Well, it's a sort of source book scenario book, because apparently the main thing with mystery books is it's writing mystery adventures is very hard, and so therefore what people who play mystery games really want is a lot of scenarios, right? So that they can, because it's actually hard to write a coherent mystery. It's hard to write a coherent mystery at the best of times when you've got all your player characters desperately charging down corridor C instead of corridor A anyway. Then it's quite a hard way of herding cats, basically. When you're doing players on a mystery thing, it's herding cats, because they'll go, oh, I will go off to this place and talk to this person. You go, why? You go, I don't know. And they'll come up with some brilliant reason why they're going off to talk to a completely unrelated character who you've haven't invented yet. Right. And then you've got to fit them into the mystery. So when what you really want is a nice, tight mystery that looks like it's got lots of dead ends, but everything leads back into the direction you want to go, but not in an obvious way. And that's actually very hard to do. It's very hard to do. It's even harder to do in a role-playing game on computer game, because you're, at least as a human being, you have an imagination, and so therefore can deal with kind of problems. But that was kind of like, that's lots of fun. And there will be, so we're bringing out adventures, and there are more Font of All Evil came out, and they all go past me. So I read a lot of these things and have to go, no, you can't do that. Yes, you can. Or make suggestions, or come up sometimes with like whole bits of lore on the fly as to why this will work, why that won't work. And, oh, can he pass through? We have a character that goes immaterial, and I was going, you can't go immaterial. It doesn't work like this. Well, the unicorns were immaterial. Like, yeah, but it didn't work like that. How do they? When we have to sit down and work out a way for it all to fit together so it works, because I'm determined to keep it canon. You see, I'm determined to keep it's probably. As soon as it goes out into the wild, right, all the millions of GMs, hopefully hundreds of GMs maybe, will sit there and just make up their own shit to suit themselves, right? I can't control the canon, but I can control the bloody canon that goes into the published GM, so I'm freaking controlling that.
I was GMing Font of All Evil yesterday, and it went really well.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that, because I read that. I wish I'd thought of that. Story. I was going, it's like, that's the other problem I have. Like, people keep coming up with like fantastic ideas for scenarios that I think, I'd quite like to nick that. Bugger.
What struck me about reading the rules is the amount of detail that's provided around police procedural, because that is such a key part of Rivers of London, just understanding how the Met works and how that's organised. I was totally absorbed by that.
Well, I mean, it's the USP of the game, right? It's rather like the insanity mechanic in Call of Cthulhu. It's going mad is what Call of Cthulhu is all about, right? The existential fear in the face of dread, existential dread in the face of the unknown, right? But Rivers of London is all about the collision between the mundanity of policing and magic, right? So the more kind of realistic the policing is, the more fun the interface between the two is. That's the whole way the books work. It's always been about that. And so therefore we had to give a lot of detail about how policing was done. Otherwise you would lose what makes it would just become and they're already good urban fantasy role-playing games out there. So it didn't need a new generic-y role-playing game. We needed something with that flavor. And so therefore we had to. The American source book is much more freeform, because the American is much more literally the Wild West in terms of magic. And so you have much more kind of like people tooling around in muscle cars with shotguns full of salt and things like that, which is, because we thought that would be fun. Then we'll give players two other options than just having to play the kind of police procedure, but it's all the same. It's still got the same kind of flavor to it. It's just that, Americans don't do law and order very well, basically.
Playing the game yesterday made me realize how much having an intimate knowledge of London is essential to it, because, that particular scenario set around Blackfriars, and so I was like researching all the pubs around there and just getting a feel for that. Because I go to London as a visitor, not as a resident. So, what tips would you give sources to find out?
Well, Google Maps is your friend, right? So Google Street View is your friend, especially because you can do time warping with it to go back to 2016 if you want to stick in the sort of period, which I use a lot of the time. Well, it depends. It depends on where you are. If you're in London, then you just go visit, sit in a cafe, watch the world go by. You find alleyways and knickknacks and little parks stuck down, things that you didn't know existed and things like that. Otherwise, you can find a tremendous amount of information. There's London Spy. There's, there's just a lot of stuff. Just Google the area and you'll be amazed. And the problem is not finding the information. The process is finding a way of not drowning in the bloody information. You will go down rabbit hole. Find a rabbit hole. Be parsimonious with your rabbit holes. That's my You will overload with information. We are planning one of our stretch goals, so to speak, although we're not Kickstarter. One of our ideas is that we will have a book that has guidelines for setting up as ancillary follies and stories that are set elsewhere in the UK.
The canals of Manchester.
Yeah, the canals of Manchester. Birmingham. Criminally underused location, Birmingham. It's like, or Newcastle. I was walking around Newcastle when I got taken out for lunch. Lynn took me out for lunch in Newcastle. I got to come down, and we went down to where the riverfront, and there's this bloody sort of 19th century apartment block built under the bridge, under one of the bridges. And I thought, my God, that's where the trolls live. Never mind, like in caves. They've got themselves an apartment block. They've built an apartment block under this bridge. That's where the trolls in Newcastle all live, in that apartment block. And it's like, and I think people can do that wherever they are. There's so much history in this country and everywhere that you can find something that will make your story. I want to do a scenario about the Strid, because it's the most scary river in the history of ever, but it's in 3 parts. And I thought, this is a river with 3 personalities. And I thought, well, what happens if one of them runs off? The other 2 personalities are sort of like goddesses running around trying to find the bloody Strid, because the Strid's like this psychopath, dangerous psychopath. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that until I watched a YouTube video about how dangerous this river was, and then suddenly you get in the story. And that's true of everything. So our aim is to make it, is to build up the line so that everyone can, they can do London if that's what they want to do. If they want to do the classical London, or they can do, the mystery. They can do Mystery Inc. in America, or they can do the Scottish version of the Folly, with all the kind of like, red caps and everything that you get in Scotland and stuff like that. So that is our aim. Our aim is to create a coherent world that people can play in, and then use as a springboard for their own imagination, because that's basically what you do with a role-playing game.
Yeah.
Because it's all, in the end, it is all about the imagination of the players and the GM. Yeah. And it is not a book. It is not a novel. You cannot force people down a particular. My favorite example of role-playing scenario is the Antarctica one. It's the one where you go and you basically read that as a novel. And you read the scenario, it's basically a novel. You don't play the game, you just read the novel. And I was like, fuck me, when I got to the denouement, I was like, oh my God. But I just thought, this is unplayable. You just couldn't, there's no way you'd get there. You just wouldn't get there. They'd all die in an ice floe in about scenario 8. And that would be it. And you'd never get to find out about the whole history and someone's head having to be cut off and stuck in a web and stuff like that. And that's the important thing. The important thing with a role-playing game is that you just have to accept that, your players are cats. And it's all, speaking of cats, and you just you're going to have, your imagination is what's going to power all of this in the end. And their imagination is going to be different from my imagination. So I can give them a framework, but in the end, they're going to make it their own. Some of them are going to write very gritty kind of like, policemen, all coppers are bastards type dramas. Some people are not going to want to be police officers. Some people are going to want to be Taggart. You can imagine Taggart, a supernatural Taggart, going around going, we're police, like that.
I think that's why he's got so much potential as a game. It's endless ideas.
Or Shetland. You could be grim and look out over the sea, crashing against the rocks like this. Be in Shetland.
Are you okay? We open up to the floor and have a couple of questions.
Yeah, I'm absolutely fine with questions. Love questions.
Yeah.
Ignore this. It's a rug covering a hole.
Here we go. We've got Paul, the writer of Font of All Evil. Here we go. We've got Paul.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So what I was going to ask, the novellas that you've written kind of fascinate me in that they feel like an array of TV pilots for new series in a way. And I want, with October Man with Tobias Winter and Winter's Gifts with Agent Reynolds and so forth. Was that the intent, or is it just you skipping around, having the opportunity to explore different streams, so to speak, pardon the pun?
It was just, well, look, I have a problem with my characters, right? And they moan at me a lot. And many of them want bigger parts than they're going to get, right? Basically. And so I imagine, if you can see this wall behind me, I imagine behind that wall is a green room, right? And all my characters are stuffed in that green room. And if I ignore a character for too long, they bang on that wall going, I want to be in the next book. And so I thought this would keep them quiet, to be honest. I thought, yeah, I'll come. Well, the German one I just did this little German thing, and he was so interesting. And my German translator had come up with all this great terminology for German magic, and we discussed how German magic would work. After you've done, I've got to use it. I can't just not have it happen. I didn't want it to happen at second hand. And I did some research, and there was such a wonderful difference between German policing and British policing and the kind of tone and everything that I thought I've just got to find a way of putting that in a book. And the novellas are a good way of doing that because they're only 40 to 50,000 words long. I can go to the publisher and I work with Subterranean Press, you see, who specialize in doing little novellas. And I can say, look, let me do these little novellas. And the reason why I had a theme for them, which is like spring, summer, autumn, winter, is because if we had to, they didn't like the idea, we could combine them into one book. You see, we could combine them into one novel. And so that's why we did that. But no, I mean, I'd love them to become a pilot for something else, but that's not why they were written. That was not the intention. I never write with that kind of foresight. I don't think to myself, my attitude honed over a career that's had its mix of triumph and diversity and disappointment is you just write the thing you want to write and hope that other people will buy it. I mean, if you think about it, it's incredibly arrogant. Hello, I've written 96,000 words. Give me $24.99. Come on. It's kind of, how arrogant is that? $24.99. I mean, they're getting so bloody expensive books. It's like, you can go out and have at least 2 beers in London for that. I mean,
Yeah, I'd love to see more of Tobias Winter. I mean, if only because I think, as per the Font of All Evil, I seem to be the one tapping the darker streams of Rivers of London, and October Man does that, I think, and I'd like to see more of Tobias.
I do have Tobias Winter plans, but they have to be fitted in with all the other plans because doing the German is a tremendous amount of research. Because I have to then go to Germany, right? Whereas, I've sworn the next couple of books I'm not going outside London because I'm just like, I finished the book in Scotland and I just got so sick of that 7.5 hours to Aberdeen that I'm like, no, the next book, I'm not going outside the M25. It's not going to happen. So, but for Germany, you have to go to Germany. You have to go there, and also all the source material. Most of the source material is not in English, and so I have to find some people to translate things for me, and I have to ask, and so it's more of a schlep. So, but yeah, there'll be more Tobias. There'll be more Abigail. I don't know about Agent Reynolds. It's quite hard writing in America because it's easy to make little niggling little mistakes that annoy people, like parking lot and car park and things like that, that then you get these long emails about it and it's kind of hard work. But, other characters, there's going to be Danny short stories. This is Beauregard, the Beauregard short stories. There's just all sorts of short stories. People go, like, they're sitting in the frickin' green room demanding at least a short story. That's their fallback position. We know you're not going to put this in a novel, but can we have a short story? I mean, there's Post Martin and Win Stanley stories, which is like the senior team, doing things like finding out why someone has put a curse on a what are they called, bingo caller in Enfield, and they they just keep coming, and I haven't got time to write them all, so it's just quite frustrating actually.
And we've got what happens with GROGMEET, Ben, is that it attracts all the Andrews in the world together.
Yeah, there are a lot of Andrews, isn't there?
There's a lot of Andrews. So I've got a couple of Andrews to bring on. First of all, Abs, you've got a question.
Hi, Ben. Are you regularly playing or running any games at the moment?
No, I don't have time. I just literally don't have time to play games at all. If I don't sit down and flog myself, I don't get any work done. So, I play video games basically. I think that's like my outlet is now video games, like just recently Planet Coaster 2, which I rationed myself to, and Transport Fever 2. Basically, Skylines 2. There's a lot of twos in my life at the moment, and I never really ran them or played them very much when I was younger. I liked creating the scenarios and I liked the theory of them, but I always got really frustrated with the players. So when I was GMing, and I really got fed up with the DMs when I was playing, and I was terrible at it, and I used to die on a regular basis. And so therefore, D&D used to be really competitive. People used to try and kill each other off all the time. Party kills in bloody Dungeons and Dragons back in the 70s was like nightmare. So yeah.
I do have a vested interest. I keep trying to persuade Ben when he's at Chimera, which is a festival I help run, to. I really want him to play a game of Rivers of London sometime. So I keep chipping away.
I'm open to doing a kind of a scenario, short scenario, a convention scenario or something. Yeah, I'll do that. That'll be fine.
Nice. Okay, thank you. Amazing.
And the next Andrew is Andrew MacDonald.
Hi, Ben. So I really like the books, and that you mentioned there that you're in the IP stage with TV things. So is there a chance of seeing a TV show or a film or something in the future?
I call it, everyone's really sick of me saying this, right? Because I've been saying it now for 10 years, but I call it Schrodinger's TV series. In that there's a box, and one day we will open it, and there will either be a TV series in it, or there won't be a TV series in it, or possibly an angry cat. But I mean, the TV, the amazing thing to me, and I've worked in television, so I know whereof I speak, but the amazing thing about television is it ever gets made at all, really. So many things can go wrong between basically let's do a TV series and TV series coming out, that it's astonishing to me that anything ever gets made by anyone under any circumstances, and that if it does get made, that it's any good. So let's just say we are as close to making a TV series as we've ever been, but I wouldn't hold my breath right now, just yet.
That's great. I mean, there's a lot of people here who that Gandalf and the Sweeney crossover really appeals to, I think.
Yeah, you see, but I've got to persuade the television company what that means, because it's all full of people who were born in like 1997 and like it's terrible, and young and privately educated and don't know what they don't get the Sweeney. They just don't get the get your trousers on, you're nicked. They just don't understand the kind of basic, that kind of working class kind of attitude that I've tried to permeate, at least Peter with, if not Nightingale, and that's quite a hard sell. That's quite hard. And then it gets, because it's an expensive show, it then has to be sold to the Americans as a matter of course. And that's a nightmare. And that's what's really held it up, is it's an expensive show that no one's really sure whether it will work as a TV series and stuff. But who knows? It could become. I might get a page on IMDb. Who knows? Be nice.
We've got a last question from Martin.
Hi, Ben.
Mind if we call you Andrew just to keep it straight?
Yeah, go for it. First of all, thanks for the books and comics. They're great. Also, thanks to the idea of a magical taggart. I love the idea. Yeah, there's been a transmogrification.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking about. I didn't want to do the accent.
My question is kind of a writer craft question, but probably crosses over into RPGs. Are you a plotter or a pantser?
I'm neither.
I'm
a frustrated plotter. I'm a man who It depends on the book. I sometimes I sat down and I've sat down and I've known exactly what's going to happen in the book, and then it's all changed because my characters won't do it. And then sometimes I've had no idea what's happening in the book, and my characters have had to kind of nudge me into coming up with a plot. It's sometimes. I mean, I'll give you a good example. Moon over Soho. I didn't have anything except for the title, so it was like, oh, Soho, nighttime Soho, werewolves. I don't know, jazz, something. That was basically how that started, and then you go, but it quickly coalesces. What happens is as soon as you start thinking about it, these ideas start coming, and then sometimes you know how it ends, and sometimes you don't. So Fox stuff, some I didn't know how it ended. I didn't really know how it ended because what had happened is I assumed it was going to end when they found the kids, you see, but then Beverly turned up with carnal desire, and I thought, well, they can't fuck while the kids are missing, so I got to find the kids halfway through because I came up with the whole thing with the river. You see, and I thought that's a brilliant scene. I've got to do that scene, but I can't do it while the kid. That's just like you can't have them do that while the kids are missing, and so therefore the kids had to tell. Then I had to come up with the second half of the plot. You see, and that's how stories get made. You come up with this. It's a sort of call and response inside your own head, really. You kind of you shout out something and something comes back, and then you bounce off. The ideas get bounced off. I always remember Stephen King talking about writing Salem's Lot, and he said he was basically bouncing a ball off the wall that was made by Dracula by Bram Stoker, and he was bouncing a ball off the wall to see what would happen, what the variations would be. And I think I think it's a very good description of what happens. You're often sometimes you're just bouncing off an idea. So you think, kids are abducted, right? Kids are abducted by fairies in the modern age. What happens? What happens? You have a massive police operation. Turns up and starts looking for them, right? And then I just kind of bounce the ideas off out. What is the intersection between the police operation and the fairy? And the great thing about that is you don't need to explain why the Fae are abducting children. They're doing it because they're Fae, and Fae do things like that. Who cares, right? So that kind of lets you off having to have that scene at the end where everyone explains everything, which I've never liked. I have to say, whenever I watch a Who Done It and you find out who did it, I'm not interested in that last scene where they sit down and tell you why. I'm usually like fast forwarding to it, going, oh, who cares? We caught him now. Let's get on with the next one. And that's my particular bent. That's my particular, in the same way that I'm, when reading Silence of the Lambs, I'm more interested in Starling than Lecter. You can basically divide the world up into people who read Silence of the Lambs and are more interested in Starling or more interested in Lecter, you see. And the ones that like Lecter will like all the vampire stories and everything, or Anne Rice and the like, because they like psychopaths for some reason. I've never really understood that myself personally. I like the people that catch psychopaths, For me, psychopaths are just plot bunnies. Okay, and they're not interesting in themselves, and so, but everyone has their own approach, and that's my approach, is to go, what is my plot bunny, what is the characters, and then my characters often tell me what they will or will not do, and then you have to build that into the story, because if you start making your characters do things that they won't do, that's when people reading the book will go, that's weird, why are they doing that? They will think something's off. Stories tend to take on a shape. That's why if you've got to the end of a book and it's had a happy ending and you think, that didn't really work, right? That's because the story was going for a sad ending. Okay, that was the way it was heading, and the author has stuck a happy ending on because they wanted a happy ending. And the reverse is true. I've read books where they've had like tragic, kind of miserable endings. Where I'm looking at you, Joe Abercrombie, for that one. Right. So, I think Joe Abercrombie just can't stand the idea of a happy ending. He just cannot stand the idea of a happy ending. So he always has to have a miserable ending at the end of every book. But I think some of his books, not all of them, but some of his books actually had happy endings where he didn't want to put them on. But that's his prerogative. I'm not going to argue with him and his sales, even if we do fight over the shelf space.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Ben. It's been a real joy to speak to you this morning, and it's fantastic. I'm just inspired now to get back to the books.
Yeah, get off, write a scenario.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much, and thank you for everyone for coming and talking. I know it's weird doing these Zoom things because I find them very strange. But hopefully I will be somewhere where you guys are at some point and we can chat, or you can come and see me, or you'll just wander into a bar and I will be there or something. Who knows?
The Save for Half podcast covers old school gaming and the modern games inspired by them. Listen in to hear about games from the 70s and 80s as well as their modern descendants. You can download episodes wherever podcasts are found on iTunes, Google, and other fine podcast distributors. You should also check them out on saveforhalf.com or email them at saveforhalfpodcast@gmail.com.
Thanks to Ben for joining us on a Sunday morning to share his insights. He was good, wasn't he? Thanks also to Lynn Hardy and Paul Fricker for the introduction and making it possible. When it was released last year, Chaosium kindly sent me a reviewed copy at my request. Thanks to their patience and waiting for this review, I was wanting to play it before I actually talked about it. And I don't normally do reviews, but I've been curious about this game since it was first mentioned at GROGMEETish 2019. Call of Cthulhu is the behemoth of investigative gaming. So, how will the same team that developed Call of Cthulhu line tackle something with a more nuanced approach to horror investigations compared with the cosmic scope of Lovecraft? As you may have gathered in the interview, I'm not yet an avid reader of the Rivers of London series. In fact, I've only read the first 2 books. Police procedurals and urban fantasy are not really my bag. However, I do find the novel series intriguing, and I enjoy the curious tone that he's written it in, a sort of left-field version of Colin Dexter or Ian Rankin. There's an attractive lightness to it, and Peter Grant is a charismatic yet real protagonist. The game claims that you don't really need to have any background in the books to play, and I'd say that was generally the case. I managed to understand the mythos of the world more thoroughly by reading this rulebook. I'd say that it does enhance the experience if there are players who do have knowledge of the setting. For example, when I played, one of the players was a real fan of the series, and he used the spell Impello to open doors. It's a sort of telekinesis spell that can move materials. It seemed a very clever application, spontaneously delivered. However, he'd explained that's how the spell is used by Peter Grant in the novels. It was also good to see the thrill of the player characters applying their own personal knowledge of the game, and there were smiles on their faces when they encountered NPCs that were familiar from the novels. The NPCs and the locations, such as the Folly, are explained really well, as are the principles of magic. It's comprehensive and fun to read, and does a good job of establishing the setting. There was a moment when one of the players referred to a character from the books that I wasn't aware of. I had to do a quick Google search under the table on my phone and managed to pick it up from there. I don't think they noticed. I also enjoyed the level of detail that's given in the rulebook for the police bureaucracy and the different approaches adopted by the Metropolitan Police. Ben is right in the interview when he says that it's a key element of what makes the setting work. In my briefing to the players, I encouraged them to adopt some of the tactical rules of engagement. It doesn't shy away from some of the controversy and difficulties of the Met as an organisation, and it really embeds the players within that bureaucratic space. And this element really influences the game and provides some of the subject matter of the scenarios. The arrest protocols and approach to bureaucracy shapes the action, not in a way that inhibits the agency of the players, but it gives them pause to consider the choices and consequences of the decisions that they make. I'm not yet confident enough to compose my own scenarios. In fact, it wasn't really until I started playing in the world that I was particularly inspired enough to write any of the potential ideas for development. But there is a decent scenario provided in the book, and there's a couple available for download from the Chaosium site. I chose to run Font of All Evil, as mentioned in the interview, written by Paul Budowski. A murder investigation with some clever historical details and a very atmospheric situations and scenes to play with. It builds in a similar way to a Call of Cthulhu adventure. And there is a particularly spectacular confrontation. It's a sort of structure that we've grown to expect from Call of Cthulhu convention games, and I recommend it if you want to get a real sense of the potential. I also ran Going Underground by Lynn Hardy, which more closely resembles a situation that you might find in one of Ben's books. It's set in a long abandoned ghost station in the London Underground, and the situations provide a very haunting setup with a number of comic elements. A number of the NPC encounters, for example, are very droll and very much reflect the tone of the novels. I played it as a con game, but it wasn't quite satisfying as a conclusion as a con game. It doesn't end with the same flourish as Font of All Evil. It's more of a closing of a chapter than the end of a specific narrative, but it did start to inspire me and realise that there's a great potential to the game. Magical or supernatural incursions. It may involve negotiating with antagonistic forces. It was good stuff, and it's probably only after playing it that I started to jot down some ideas of my own. Let's put aside the setting for a moment, because where this game really shines is in its particular application and unique flavour of BRP, basic role-playing, the house system of Chaosium. Elsewhere, it has been described as a cut-down version of Call of Cthulhu 7th edition rules, but I think there's more to it than that. More accurately, it's a compact version of BRP, which has been fine-tuned for investigative adventures. The skills in particular have been refined down to just a handful of core skills, and any specialisms are handled separately. A much more sensible approach compared with the long list that you're usually faced with on a character sheet. Luck, as presented in the Call of Cthulhu 7th edition rules, is an optional extra, but here luck is core to the game and as a meta currency, a way of dealing with the uncertainties thrown up by the scenarios, really foundational to it. It also embeds the Poke Cthulhu ability to make a death-defying intervention to avoid being killed. Store away 30 points of luck to avoid these situations. The wounds and damage rules eliminate hit points. Instead, there are various wound statuses and the fixed damage of weapons. Combat is over pretty quickly, but creates dramatic situations. I can see this being adopted by future adaptations of Call of Cthulhu, as it's much more slick compared with the current hit point attrition. Chaosium do have a knack for over-explaining things that are fairly easy to grasp, and some of that's on display here. You could argue that it's been pitched at new players, but I'd say some of the convoluted descriptions of how things work are counterproductive. BRP is simple, isn't it? Just a percentage and roll low with embellishments. Mechanically, spells are really well handled because they can be built upon, and it has a matrix for mix and matching as the magician gets better. I like it. I also like how it deals with the concept of the physical residue of magic. This is central to the investigations. There are traces of magic left in the physical world, which are the core clues for the investigators. There's a certain lyricism in the description of spell properties. The rulebook provides a random generator, so each spell user has their own signature trait. When I first heard of Rivers of London as an RPG, I did wonder whether it was needed. Liminal, for example, is an effective urban fantasy horror game that occupies similar ground. But this does something different. This does something more specific. And although, as Ben says in the interview, it could have a wider application, but this is designed to emulate the worlds of Rivers of London, and playing the going underground scenario made me appreciate that. It also encouraged me to want to read some more of Ben's books, to look for ideas and little nuggets tucked away that can be expanded upon in scenarios. So, that was Rivers of London. I wonder whether it will make its way onto the groggy list for 2024. Well, you'll be able to find out very soon, because that is the next episode, which will be coming to your pod box in a jiffy. Until then, adios, amigos.